Let's talk about accessibility. So we all work in tech. How many of you typically think about accessibility when you're working? We've got some hands, looks like about 30% of people, which is very cool, awesome. In tech, when we're thinking about accessibility, we typically focus a lot on compliance, right? We look at the WCAG standards, usually like the 2.2 or 2.x, whatever it ends up being this year, right? And we think about things that typically support screen readers, so like alt text for images, ARIA landmark roles, which are defining that this is a navigation, this is a header, this is a footer, right? This is my main content type of thing. And we even have some tools to help us with this. But I find this to be a bit of a problem, personally. Last time I talked about accessibility here, there were two main things I really wanted people to take away from my talk. And the biggest thing I wanted people to take away was that you should talk to and test with your actual users, right? We always joke about like, you're not your user, and it's very true, but we also only have our own lived experience. And since I gave that talk, there has been a lot of AI that has happened, right? And it's had its ups and downs, but I think universally we all kind of tend to gripe about AI. AI didn't do what I wanted. I asked it to do this thing, it did something else. How can I get AI to listen to me, right? So why do we trust AI with accessibility? Especially when accessibility is a discipline, topic, subject that already before AI really required stepping into the shoes of somebody else's lived experience. AI struggles significantly with understanding context and user intent. It struggles to make nuanced decisions about complex accessibility scenarios. It lacks the required adaptability to unique accessibility needs and workflows. And most importantly, it doesn't have the empathy and user-centered thinking that really makes accessibility effective, right? It can't navigate the gray areas where accessibility guidelines meet real-world constraints. So I'm not here to talk about how crappy AI is at accessibility testing. I think it's better to maybe focus on the more positive side of it, right? Human experience requires humans. So let's talk about what that means, right? So I'm going to start off with two of the things that I want you to remember the most on this talk. Instead of putting them at the end, we're going to keep these in mind as we go through, right? One, accessibility is about real people. And two, success, user success, is more important than compliance. So I'm Malak. I was already introduced. I started Magnolia development because I wanted to solve problems. I really, really, really love solving problems. And part of that is understanding the real needs of a real user, right? I've spent my whole career kind of obsessed and focused on this. So of course I made my way into the land of digital accessibility. It was only natural, right? And the same principles that go into good product design are also the same principles that go into good accessibility. And if you don't believe me, here's a quote from a guy named Tim Brown, who's the CEO and president of a company called 𝐸, which pioneered human-centered design and design thinking in the early 90s. And he says it's not an us versus them, or even an us on behalf of them. It has to be us with them. And if we can remember this idea here, this gets us really far when we think about accessibility, not just the nitty-gritty of do we have the right ARIA roles, do we have the right ARIA live settings, but real good accessibility, which should start before we even get to the keyboard. So let's recap what disability is real quick. There are 5 main categories with accessibility. We've got visual, motor, so like your movement, body, speech, of course, hearing, and cognitive. And part of the talk, is accessibility is still more than screen readers. Even within the visual category here, not all of visual disability is benefited by a screen reader. Some people with visual disability prefer to zoom in to like 5x or 10x even. Some prefer it much smaller, right? So we need to really break outside of this idea of, oh, it works on a screen reader, right? There's a lot more to that story. And on top of this, disability can also be permanent, right? Like you're born with it, or maybe you sustained an injury in life. It can also be temporary, right? You know, you got eye drops after the optometrist. It's a little bit hard to see. Or maybe you have a cast on your limb while it heals. Disability can also be situational. Like right now, we're all in a theater, and if you received a phone call, you would need to either leave the theater or send a quick text saying, hey, I can't talk right now. But it could also be wearing mittens in cold weather, or maybe you've got a sleeping baby, or you're driving, right? Disability typically occurs when an individual is in an environment that does not support them, which is why we say that accessibility is for everyone. So let's talk about that, right? Let's go into some gray zones, because oftentimes when we talk about accessibility, there's a lot of back and forth and contention between what the design needs are versus what the product needs are. And this happens a lot. It's not always a very straightforward shot. So we could consider things like, should this image be marked as decorative, or should we put alt text on it? If we have a complex data visualization, how do we make that more accessible to users without losing the impact? Oftentimes with visualizations, it requires understanding the relationship and context between large sets of data, and that can be kind of difficult to figure out how to present no matter what your disability level is, right? Perhaps we might wonder, which ARIA label should we use on something? That's usually going to be really subjective on the page. It's not always, hey, this header element requires ARIA role header. That's usually already there with the tag, right? But which part of the content is actually the main content? Which part is like an aside, right? Or perhaps ARIA Live, which will announce things to the screen reader. It'll actually interrupt to say, hey, quick update as the user is trying to listen to the content on the page. How do we want to handle that? Do we want to announce every second, every hour, every 15 minutes? What's the right answer here, right? How do we ensure that complex interactive websites, which a lot of us here work on sometimes, maybe, how do we make sure they work for users with cognitive disabilities? People, short-term memory, ADHD, intellectual disability, right? How do we make sure that those users can still be successful in the goal that we want them to be able to have when they work with our interfaces? When I approach situations like these, for me in my professional life, there are a lot of answers to each one of these. And they could all be done compliantly as far as, you know, accessibility standards and definitions and success criteria go, right? But which one do we pick, right? So how do we move towards the most accessible solution? Especially if you want to think about success over compliance. These are the typical things that I think about in the loose order that I typically think about them. Is first I'll look at what is the user's goal? Like, what are they trying to do? Like, why are they here? Why are they at my website? Why are they using my product? Why do they have my app? What do they need right now? Then I want to know, like, what do they need in order to do that? Like, if my goal is to pay my internet bill, right? I probably need to know how much is the bill and when is it due? Can I put that off a little bit more, right? Do they need other pieces of information or context to help them make a decision or a choice if they're here because they're researching or learning something? What interfaces do they need in order to work with the information I have available to give them that would be the best way for them to be successful in their goal? I'll also consider the context. And by context, I mean more in product land, product design land, the user journey, not just when they first show up to my website, you know, like arrived at homepage, clicked on logged in, clicked on to type in their username, but before that, like what was their journey before they got here? Within sales and marketing, they might call this like the user funnel, right? Perhaps they were in sales, we might say they're aware of the need and then they do research and then they select you, right? But it could also be for a student in school, they were assigned an essay and then they had to go to, I mean, I went to the library as a kid, but they would go do some research right before they finally come back to Google Classroom to maybe turn in an assignment, right? So what is that context or journey? Are they busy? Are they distracted, right? Are they on the go or rushing? Because remember, disability can be situational. When you're rushing, distracted, stressed, tired, this is kind of a situational cognitive disability. Your brain's not really functioning that well, and we should try to make things easy for you. Lastly, is I think about how can I help? Like, what can I do? What can I provide from an interface or perspective or display to make that easy? How can I give them what they need in a way that fits their context, that serves their goal and purpose? So when I think about this, like I want to think about how many people, like how can I get the maximum number of people to be able to receive benefit from the interface that I'm working on? So let's jump into a very simple example. It's a little bit contrived. I made it up last night. So we have this image here. This is a picture of Islamic art. It is a pierced window screen made of red sandstone. And I think it's quite lovely. It's very, very beautiful and geometric, right? But should it have alt text? The answer to that really depends on the context and the scenario, right? So let's look at two examples. Here we've got a D&D group website. And in this application with the image, the user's goal is to learn about D&D night. They need information about where, when, what to bring perhaps, context, probably busy, on the go, distracted. If anybody here has played D&D and try to get vibe and tone of like the fantasy setting that we're all gonna be playing in, but like if you imagine a screen reader user who is busy, on the go, stressed, trying to see if they can fit this in their schedule, the screen reader, if it announces the alt text description, might sound something like image, pierced window screen, geometric, red sandstone, dungeon night, a weekly Dungeons & Dragons campaign, The Gathering. Once a week, the table, right? Or we could just go straight to the content, right? Which just goes straight to dungeon night. That would be more ideal for the user in this context. So in this case, we'd probably mark this as decorative, right? Let's look at this example. This is the Met's website, so the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The user's goal here is probably more exploratory, more learning, more research, more curiosity-based, right? So they'll want details about craftsmanship, maybe some historical notes. Within their context, they're probably really focused and engaged and they're learning, right? So we can help by having really big image examples and detailed explanations. And in this case here, yeah, we definitely would want to put alt text. And in this case, the Met's alt text that they put was pierced window screen, jolly, red sandstone, pierced, carved, which very descriptive. And for me, when I was first looking at this example here, I was a little bit confused by the alt text personally. Didn't say much about like the shape or the context, but when you think about the user who's curious, exploring, trying to learn more, this description here suddenly makes a lot of sense. It really describes like what we're seeing here as far as the material and the craftsmanship. So I know this is a contrived example, right? But if you imagine the difference between a stock photo of like a happy smiling team group, right? How might we treat that as decorative or alt text if we put that on perhaps like a small company's team page where they know all those people versus a hero background image in an e-commerce website where it would be more decorative? This context is important to doing the right thing from an accessibility standpoint. So let's look at another example. Here we got a graph with some data. The numbers are roughly not that important, right? It's moderately complex. It'll work for our example here. More or less, we've got on our vertical axis here, FTE, which is full-time employees, which is how many employees are assigned to one of the three products that are here, which are represented by the colors blue, green, and yellow. The bars here represent how many people were expected to be necessary for each product. And the lines show the reality of how many people were actually required and hired for it. So let's think about some use cases, some users, right? On an HR level, perhaps, and I don't work in HR, so maybe I've got this totally wrong, but they probably want to understand how many employees need paychecks now and in the future. And they probably need whole numbers and visual trend reference to understand that. Within their context, I imagine HR to be kind of boring. Sorry if we have any HR people here. But they probably want to get ahead of like a payroll crunch or before end of year financial stuff that might be happening, right? So understanding trends and projections and what they need to do is probably important. We can help them by having a table of simple data or a number of data showing maybe a simple illustration, just like we have here. And in this case, I think this visualization works pretty well. But let's consider a different user. Maybe director of engineering level, right? This person probably has a goal of understanding why things suck so much in the office and why all the projects are stalling, right? Not great for user morale, not great for the end line of getting things out the door. So they need a clear call to action back to data so they know what to do, right? We need to tell them what to do and make them believe it. Within their context, they're probably stressed, worried, jumping around from meeting to meeting, competing deadlines, right? So we can help with a simple direct comparison of resourcing plans to actual allocation, right? And in this case, I think this illustration sucks. I think this is the least accessible solution that you could come up with this data. A better solution might look like this, right? We'll just directly compare where we thought we would be at with where we're actually at, and then summarize what's needed. We need more funding, right? Clear, direct, easy to read, meets the user where they're at cognitively. So let's do one more example. This one's much simpler and probably something that we run into a lot. This is a highly complex nested navigation on some random e-commerce website. I bet you this is probably like a doozy to code for keyboard accessibility navigation too, because we've got on the top here main categories and then subcategories and then more things underneath there, right? So let's consider two users again. We've got user number one. The user's goal is to buy a thing. They know what they want and they're doing comparison shopping. So they need quick access to that thing. And we can help them by making a clear and direct route to that exact thing, but we don't typically know that, right? As people who are making this and we're representing an e-commerce website filled with millions of stuff, right? So in this case, this is probably the least useful interface, right? But we could also consider user two. Maybe this user is just window shopping. They know that they need something for their house and they're just kind of exploring and they're trying to see, you know, like, oh, what was it that I needed again? Maybe they've got ADHD, right? Or maybe they just are curious what options are out there. So we can help by displaying a full range of options clearly. And in this case, we have met this user where they're at, right? It's great. In this case here, it's kind of difficult to see, but in that dark background there is a search box. And interestingly enough, there is a WCAG success criteria, 245, which is called multiple ways, in which it defines that you should offer a user multiple ways to get to your content. So this website actually does it pretty well, but it's important to consider, like, which is more important for the website that we are building and the experience that we're crafting, right? So all these examples have multiple solutions. Each solution can be coded compliantly according to WCAG standards. And knowing the right solution to pick depends on ensuring the user's success, right? In some web disciplines, we might call this the conversion rate, which is direct dollars, and people higher up love to hear about dollars, right? And even in our own lives, like how many times have we chosen between two very similar products online and we just pick one that we think is prettier with a clearer, simpler interface? It's the same thing that's happening here, right? So let's look at some real life stats before I wrap up. The most recent WebAIM 2025 report, which looks at the top 1 million homepages on the web, 95% of those have a detectable error. Detectable, that means that there's going to be more. Detectable only gets about 50% of issues, maybe a little bit higher these days, but still pretty low. Homepage complexity continues to rise. It's up 7.1% from last year. And about 79% of pages that were sampled use ARIA outside of landmark roles, because those are pretty easy to get. Yet, home pages that use ARIA have got around 76 errors on average compared to 27 errors on those without. So it seems like maybe we could think about that compliance-focused accessibility and tooling is not really helping us out that much, especially as things get more and more complex. Like, we're not going to get more simple over time. We need to be talking with and testing with our actual users. And we need to be remembering that accessibility, there's no amount of coding that can fix an inaccessible design, right? It's like putting lipstick on a pig. The design phase is all about the user and the user journey, right? And especially now that everybody's vibe coding their way forward these days, I think it's more important than ever to take a step back and remember the actual people that we're working with, that we're serving through our products. Because accessibility is about real people, and their success is far more important than compliance. Thank you.